The Strays. This perspective-driven study of the link between race and identity has had quite a lot of wind in its sails since its release on Netflix. There's quite a lot packed into the nooks and crannies of this film, so I'm going to perform a deep analysis to extract some theories, themes, and symbolism. These thoughts are just my own, and I'd like to stress that this video is designed for those who have seen the film already, as there will be major spoilers ahead. What we experience in the film is a mother's abandonment of being black, sweeping under the carpet the black nuances in herself, and fully driving towards being a white upper-class version of herself. This makes us question just what it means to be black, what it means to be white, and how both of those races can be perceived in some of their most extreme forms. The mother in question here is Neve, or is it Cheryl? That's something we learn in the film. She was Cheryl, a working class woman who was struggling and ran away from her home and family responsibilities. This included her partner, described as a bad man, and her children Carl and Dione, both a darker skin tone than herself. Cheryl is black, though is fair-skinned in comparison to Carl and Dione. What I found interesting in the film's introduction is how it played around with the aspect ratio. Here, Cheryl's world is presented within a box, black bars surrounding the footage on screen. Then, when we see Cheryl in the present day as Neve, the ratio switches to a much sleeker widescreen. I think that this encapsulated this character's worlds. In the intro, it's as if Cheryl is boxed in, the black surroundings almost being like a darkness that is closing in on her, ultimately making her run away and start a new life with a new identity. And that's when we get the much more attractive and polished widescreen effect, as if she's improved her world to appear more striking and refined. That refinement actually is rather fitting too when tackling the subject of quote-unquote blackness in the film, as by switching up the aspect ratio, the amount of blackness surrounding Cheryl becomes minimized. She moves onto a new life, moves to a white upper middle class area, finds herself a white partner, and has 2 biracial children. Firstly, by moving to that area and getting into a relationship with a white man, falls in line with what direction Cheryl wanted to move in when becoming Neve. Neve wants to almost reject her black roots, and what they entail, becoming white in the most extreme way possible. She even alters her accent into becoming well-spoken and posh so she can come across as more educated and intelligent, but also fundamentally more characteristically white. Neve names her children Sebastian and Mary, which are generally higher class white names in England today, despite them being biracial. It's as though Neve wants to empower her own children with the same ideologies that she has directed towards herself, even from birth, by aligning her kids into that higher class white persona. Throughout the film, whenever black people or references to black are mentioned or hinted towards in Neve's presence, she has a reaction to it. She'll either highlight the term black in a surprised or shocked manner, or begin to scratch her head as a response. Neve wears wigs to cover up the worn-down natural hair beneath. The theme of hair is something which appears throughout the film. Firstly, the wig covering up the tattered hair beneath falls in line with the persona change, a refined, sleeker appearance covering up the rougher, damaged past self. When going into a dreamlike flashback into her life as Cheryl, her hair comes to life, engulfing her like vines, as though her hair and its presentation are a link between her old and new lives. Then Mary has her hair done several times, which at points is described as ethnic in style. Neve questions the hair, asking who did your hair like that, and gets visibly disturbed when seeing Mary adopting these more black hairstyles. Again, it feeds into Neve's uncomfortability surrounding anything she identifies as leaning more towards black culture than white culture. It's like she begrudges or debatably attacks the black side to her family, wanting to shift them into pure whiteness. Carl and Dione represent the antithesis of Neve. If Neve is a representation of whiteness in arguably its most stereotypically exaggerated form, then Carl and Dione represent blackness in its most stereotypically exaggerated form. Many things about their characterization fit with how black people are perceived at the most extreme point of their nature. The sad truth of reality is black people are so often seen as being criminals, often lower class, threatening and intrusive, and that's how Carl and Dione are painted in The Strays. After being abandoned by Cheryl, they grew up to hate her and seek revenge. So they track down Cheryl, now Neve. They work their way into integrating with Sebastian and Mary. Carl works his way into getting a job at the school where Neve is the deputy head. They push black agendas onto the children through fashion and music, and then invade the family home, threaten them all, and kill the only white family member, Ian. Even in the earlier segments of the film, both Carl and Dione can be seen by Neve, where she perceives that they are stalking her. You're almost led to believe that these are hallucinations, bad memories from Neve's past catching up on her, when really they are actually there, the remnants of her past, who have returned to punish her. They're actively illustrated as bad people through their forceful and murderous nature, deceiving the family by giving themselves the classier names of Abigail and Marvin to shadow their true selves. When it comes to clothing, Carl and Dione can often be seen wearing informal clothing like hoodies or joggers, that kind of thing, whereas Neve is always classy, wearing upmarket fashion pieces, again playing into a difference in cultural tastes and wealth. I do not agree with or condone these stereotypes, though in the way The Strays sets up its narrative skeleton, Carl and Dionne's traits are just as stereotypically black as Neve's traits are stereotypically white. We are seeing polar opposites of the spectrum, from each race and their traits being stressed, to Ian describing his family as his tribe, to Carl and Dionne's presence at Neve's garden party said to be polluting the environment. It even comes down to musical choices. When Neve is first introduced, it's to classical music, Puccini's Madama Butterfly, music which is culturally viewed as white and upper class. When Carl and Dione are introduced, it's to Talkin' the Hardest by Giggs, culturally viewed as black and lower class. Of course, music is for everyone, though the contrast between the song choice here fits with the way these characters are presented. To expand on the topic of Carl and Dione entering Neve's home, we have an interesting choice of Dione watching an adaptation of Hansel and Gretel. The setup of this fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm gels with Carl and Dionne's perspective of events. Hansel and Gretel are two children. They are abandoned in a dark forest, in the same way Carl and Dione were abandoned in tough circumstances. They end up making their way to an amazing house made of candy, cake and gingerbread, but within it lives a witch, much like how Neve now lives in a gorgeous upmarket family home in a posh area, and it's Neve who is a witch to Carl and Dione. I found this literary reference to be a pretty intriguing one to reflect how Neve is viewed. I also believe that there were some visual nods to how the previous life of Cheryl and the new life of Neve get blended together. A smaller one was when an envelope is posted to Neve's house containing a small blue racing car. This racing car can be seen in the introduction, a fridge magnet, used to stick up Neve's message that she's just going to the hairdressers. This little object is a symbol connecting both of her personas, and that her past life is re-emerging in her present. But one of the larger visual connections to me was a fairly subtle one. There's a scene where in the middle of the night, Neve drinks a glass of water from the tap, and when doing so, her house begins to change into looking like her old one. I didn't think much of this at first until the third act of the film, where the taps in Neve's home are used to flood the place. I couldn't help but notice this connection of the water. It was when drinking the tap water that Neve was transported to her past, almost like it helped trigger her memories. And then when those memories overcome her in the form of Carl and Dione entering her house, the home becomes flooded with the same tap water. Water is often linked with purity, much like how Neve seeks purity via becoming purely white in her character. But tap water in the UK can be a bit of a funny one. Though it is recognised as being safe for human consumption and one of the best water supplies in the world, it has been known at times to contain chlorine, limescale, fluoride, lead, microplastics, harmful bacteria, parasites, synthetic hormones, antidepressants, cocaine byproducts, caffeine, carbamazepine, ibuprofen, and naproxen. Essentially, UK tap water isn't 100% pure. It can contain imperfections, and I think that this linked to Neve's imperfections that she wanted to cast out, and also the general blending of the white and black conflict in the film. It's a real question of purity. What does purity actually mean? Can anything be truly pure? It's a real head scratcher, Probably why Neve can't stop head scratching. To close off the video, it would be wrong for me to not talk about that ending. I know this ending has been pretty notorious in reviews of the film, and something that annoyed a lot of people due to its sudden nature. With my honest review head on, yeah, I do agree. I was really invested and then it just suddenly stopped. But with my deep analysis head on, I think it was quite fitting to the character relationships here. After being delivered a takeaway, Neve switches into being really nice and calm, and says she's just gonna go get some money to tip the driver, but winds up running away with him, now abandoning her children for the second time. The ending was built up to be strong, kept you engaged, until all of a sudden it just ends disappointingly. But that's exactly the feeling Neve gave to her kids. Her sudden abandonment disappointed them, left them with unanswered questions, without a resolution, wanting more, feeling let down. So if I look at the ending from that angle, I do actually think it was a pretty clever move that worked alongside the narrative, though I have no idea if that was intentional or if it was just simply a poorly done ending. Regardless, I did quite enjoy The Strays overall. A lot of its messages and themes were at times a bit on the nose, kind of felt like an English Get Out in some bits, but I did enjoy analysing it. Do you have any thoughts on the film? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. I've been Connor from Unleash the Gulls, and please do sub to the channel if you haven't already, as it'd be a big help. Cheers out.